Hi, everybody, and a very pleasant good evening to you, wherever you may be. The F&M Schaefer Brewing Company raises a glass of ice-cold Schaefer beer in your honor, and Lucky Strike's blowing smoke rings at you from the studios of Comfortably Zoned Radio. And it's time once again for Dodgers baseball, a tale of two cities, from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. I'm your host, Peter Trunk, and my co-host, as always, is Ron Rabinovitz. Ron, how are you doing?
Hi, Peter. Good. I'm doing fine. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing very well, very well. How's
Great.
everything out there?
It's great, great. I'll be happier if the Dodgers win tonight.
Well, so will I, and I'll be very happy if they win Thursday, because I have box seats in Philadelphia to see them.
I'm so jealous.
Well, we have a pretty good show tonight lined up. We have a special guest. I'm going to defer to you, Ronnie. You're going to introduce our guest, tell us what he's all about, and then we're going to listen to some really interesting stuff. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's a great honor.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I apologize. I'm the one that's always complaining about people stepping on each other verbally, and I'm the one to do it tonight. I apologize, but I would be remiss if I didn't wish Edwin Donald Snyder a happy birthday today, who in 1926 was born out in California. He wore number 4. He was the Duke. He was our center fielder. He had more home runs and more runs batted in the 1950s than any other major league ball player. And we have to wish him a happy, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Duke. Absolutely.
There you go. And without further ado, go ahead, Ronnie. Take it away.
Okay. You bet. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce my dear friend, Professor Richard Zamoff, who is a associate professor in the sociology department. He joined GW in 1982 and researching methods, sociology, and sports. Later on, he started the Jackie Robinson and Rachel Robinson project, teaching the course Jackie Robinson, Race, Sports, and the American Dream. He developed many lecture series, and I just found this out. Last year, he was awarded by the GW Student Athletes the Professor of the Year. Congratulations and welcome, Richard. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Ronnie. Glad to be with you.
Great, great. Now, besides being a professor and my friend, you are a huge Dodger fan. You grew up in Brooklyn, as did Peter, and we want to talk about some of your memories, and then, of course, later on we want to get into how the Jackie Robinson project started and what's going on with it now. Okay? So take it away, Richard.
Well, I'll give you a little background that may be interesting. Actually, although I have family in Brooklyn, my brother and I grew up in the Bronx, and as a matter of fact, in the shadows of Yankee Stadium, and we always talk about being the only Brooklyn Dodger fans within miles around, which created interesting summers and very sad Octobers up until 1955. But we had a good time with all of that, and many fond memories, trekking out to Ebbets Field and more often to the Polo Grounds, which was only about 3 stops on the subway from where we lived. So we would see the Dodgers, I would estimate probably about 10 times a year, usually about 7 times at the Polo Grounds and maybe 3 times at Ebbets Field. And didn't go to the Yankee Stadium at all until the Dodgers and Giants left New York, and that was just because of missing Major League Baseball. But we're real happy when the Mets got back into got into the league, and then we saw the Dodgers for a couple of years at the Polo Grounds, and then back out at Shea Stadium when the Mets played there. And I've continued to follow them on the West Coast. The feelings aren't always exactly the same. But I did follow them when they moved out there. They had so many of the guys from Brooklyn there, and Koufax and Drysdale and Gilliam and Reese and Hodges and Snyder, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I still follow them to this day. I just saw them I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I just went to the game last Saturday at Nationals Park and saw real exciting ball game. The Dodgers won that one 3-2, and Yasiel Puig saved the game with a real nice catch in right field. All these conversations about the Dodgers brings back very, very happy memories. And without jumping the gun on my Jackie Robinson work, I can't think about the Dodgers of the late 40s and 50s without connecting it to Robinson and his social significance as well as his athletic skill. I grew up in a household where social issues were central, and so I never quite understood until I was a little bit older that Robinson was more than a real good baseball player, but somehow the message got through, and I think that's what caused me to think about it again all those years later when I started introducing him into my academic work, and then helping to create the Jackie Robinson Project, and then the Jackie and Rachel Robinson Society, and a lot of components that we're engaged in over the last 20 years. It's hard to believe, but we've been going to George Washington University. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. The project began in 1997, coinciding with the 50th anniversary year. And it's branched out. We have so many things going on. We have what's called an educational initiative. We go out into schools all over the place, and we have a museum exhibit that we use. We travel around with it around the country. So, we get into that more later, but I think I'll just start my participation by fondly remembering those days in the Bronx when when the Dodgers seemed to be the most important thing around, and we followed other sports as well, but nothing like the Dodgers during the baseball season.
Right. And how did the students? I know you have students that are involved in this society, that are participating each year. Wonderful young students that I've had a pleasure of meeting several times. And how did that go all about? That you got them all involved?
Well, the project, as I just indicated, started in 1997, and as you mentioned earlier, the first and only major component of the project for the first 3 years was what we called the lecture series, and we would bring people on campus from all over the place, mostly academics. As you probably figure out, the big emphasis here is on Robinson as a historical figure off the playing field as well as on the playing field, not to negate his magnificent baseball skills, but to use him as an illustration of somebody who transformed the society, as other athletes have, and as the issue of race often does. But to think about him as a historical figure, as Rachel often says, an informal civil rights leader. And so we did that lecture series for about 3 years, and then I figured it was time to start introducing an actual academic course, which you also referred to before, and I started doing that in 2000. And the students did their own projects in that course, and one of the early semesters, 3 of my students suggested that they form a student organization on campus and call it the Jackie Robinson Society. And it would basically be a service-oriented organization, but they would certainly talk about Robinson's legacy as a central part of what they did. So that is what got the student organization off the ground. And then about 4 or 5 years into the society, because we've emphasized Rachel's role so much in her husband's story, we changed the name of the society to the Jackie and Rachel Robinson Society, and we introduced this thing that we call our educational initiative. The educational initiative is where students who have taken the course want to stay with it after the course is over, so they usually join the society and they help us go out to different schools all over the country as our budget permits, and they will talk to youngsters from the 2nd grade all the way through AP advanced placement history classes. So it's really like second grade up through the 12th grade. Obviously, the presentations are tailored to the level of the audience. But we've also started going to senior citizen centers and to community centers and to libraries and to all sorts of other organizations where people seem to be very, Robinson is one of these historical figures who, everybody recognizes. He's more recognizable than most American presidents. You don't even have to have his name on the picture. People know who he is. And he just, he's part of any conversation about sociology and sports. And we get lots of invitations from all these different groups to come out, and the students who are active in the society are usually the people that we send out. They come, GW attracts students from all over the United States, so we're now working, I think it's in about a dozen states, the District of Columbia. We even have a school in Japan that we work with. We don't do any site visiting to Japan for budgetary reasons, but we are very involved with the woman who teaches English there, and we help her introduce material into her classroom. So last time we took a census of our activity, we had reached over 7,000 students since we started the initiative. And that's face-to-face with 7,000 students and about 250 teachers and administrators. And the hope is that, we're not going to keep going back to the same schools. The hope is that the people we met with will sort of carry the ball forward and will actually continue to do with their students the same kinds of things that we're introducing them to. So it's a real gratifying activity, and I of course teach 3 classes, so it's hard for me to get away, and I'm always relying on other people to do these site visits. I'll do some site visits in the spring semester and sometimes during the summer, but in the fall it's really students who are taking a break from school, or they're home for Thanksgiving and they'll go home a few days early and they'll do a school visit, or they're alumni of GW and they take some time off where they're working. Just to give you a flavor of the states, and I'll probably leave a couple out, but as you know, we have a couple of schools in Minnesota. We are working in Pennsylvania, in Indiana, in Mississippi, in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Florida, Virginia, New York State, but not just the city, places like Buffalo, things like that. So we're really spread out geographically, and very diverse audiences. We go to public schools, private schools, parochial schools, charter schools. I mean, there's really no type of educational institution that we're not going to go to if we're convinced that the teachers and administrators on the receiving end are really interested and will commit to, some resources in terms of time, not in terms of dollars. We don't charge any money for our visits, but we do want them to spend a little time preparing their students for our visit and giving us the physical space to do an assembly program or classroom presentations or whatever technology we need. And it's worked out fabulously well. I mean, if anybody had told me 5 years ago when we started the initiative that by this time we would have reached 7,000 students, I probably would have been a bit skeptical, but we have done a pretty good job in terms of outreach. And then, as you probably can figure out, once the word begins to spread that we're a decent educational resource, people are anxious to have us come, and we're only limited by the by the budget we have, because the airlines don't let us travel for free and the hotels don't put us up for free. So it's not inexpensive to do these things, but we're happy to do it as the donations keep coming in.
Great, that's fabulous. Peter, do you have any questions for Richard?
I'd like to know if Rachel, or perhaps Jackie's daughter, is involved, and if so, how much and how?
Well, we have worked. We have certainly had contacts with Rachel and Sharon. Of course, Rachel runs the Jackie Robinson Foundation. That is a completely separate entity. It has nothing to do with the GW activities in a formal way. Rachel started that foundation, as I'm sure everybody knows, in 1973, a year after Jack passed away. And they are primarily a program that provides college scholarships and mentoring to high ability, economically disadvantaged minorities. And they just see, they have a fantastic graduation rate, et cetera, et cetera. Rachel has visited GW and spoken to my students in my class and to a larger group of students in an auditorium-style program. Sharon has visited GW. I have made many trips to the foundation, sometimes with a couple of my students. And, we've chatted about our progress. I've got some wonderful letters from Rachel in our files where she's commenting on the work that we've done, and I share those letters with my students in our last class, because we always talk about preserving the legacy and promoting the legacy and the various ways that we can do that. One of my favorite letters from Rachel is where she points out that George Washington University is the only college in the United States that she's aware of that has an ongoing tribute to her husband by virtue of the class. Years and years ago, there was one other college in Texas that had a Jackie Robinson Society, but they abandoned that after the 50th anniversary year. I'm not sure why. But in 1997, there were many places that had, memorial programs and all of that, and then those programs just disappeared once the 50th anniversary was over. My intention in starting the project was to institutionalize something that would not go away. And even though we did not have a large amount of support in the early days, we managed to hang in there, largely with some volunteer assistance from people like all of us who, felt that Robinson was so much more than a baseball player and that he deserved to be talked about in an academic and intellectual way, and that the connection between race and sports was too important to leave it to sports talk radio and things like that. So we persevered in those early years, and we haven't had a Mark Cuban style benefactor, but we've had enough contributions from various sources to hang in there and keep the ball rolling. And we always seem to stay a year or two ahead of the curve, and as well as we do, we'll just keep going. So, but Rachel and Sharon are very much aware of what we're doing, and we do interface from time to time. Some of my students have done their senior theses. Last year, I had 2 years ago, I had a student who did a project on Rachel Robinson as a 1950 feminist. The take on her presentation was that although she probably wouldn't have been called a feminist at that time, or maybe wouldn't have even called herself a feminist at that time, that in reality she was not only Jack's rock, but she was also advancing the women's movement by her independence and her independent accomplishments, and she certainly continued that as the years have gone by. So one of my students did a paper on Rachel. Sharon, as you probably know, is an author of children's books, and many of my students have read some of her books and tried to adapt some of the content to the presentations that they make in schools. Some of Sharon's books are actually true accounts. She did one about Jack and Rachel. I believe it's called something like A Christmas Gift, where they interacted with the Jewish family, not knowing that they did not celebrate Christmas per se. And because what the little boy told it was Jackie Jr., that the family did not have a Christmas tree, Jack and Rachel went out and bought a Christmas tree for this family, only to find out when they presented it that it was just sort of semi-embarrassing. But Sarah just put that into a children's book, and it's a wonderful story. And
very cute.
So my students do all those kinds of things. And when they do term projects, the project often is something like the women in Jackie Robinson's life. And of course they talk about his mother Nellie and about Rachel and about Sharon as the key as the key influences. So, it's really hard to, even give a single class presentation about Robinson without getting into his relationship with Rachel then of course later on with Sharon. I was just noticing the other day that it's hard to believe that Sharon is, I think she passed her 65th birthday or something like that.
Wow.
Yes, she did. Yeah. Well, she was born in 1950.
That's right. So she's 62.
So
she's 67.
67.
Wow.
67.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. How time flies.
That's right.
Time does fly. Let me ask you this, Professor. Have you had any input, social, economic, or otherwise, from baseball players, either past or present, or from MLB itself?
Well, that creates the MLB not directly, although I do get invitations from time to time. Certainly, the big one was I was invited to be on the field in 1997 at the 50th anniversary presentation. Unfortunately, I had a class that evening, so I wasn't able to make it. But no, most of my interactions are with guys who played with Robinson. I was fortunate enough on 2 occasions to have Clem Levine on campus. Levine actually slept in my house, and we had a great time. And he just was a wonderful, wonderful person. I really can't say enough about him. I mean, we picked him up at the airport. One of my boys that time was about, 19 years old, and he was admiring his 1955 World Series ring that Clem was wearing. And so Clem said, "Hey, would you like to wear it?" And he took it off, and Jeffrey wore that ring from 10 in the morning till about 9 at night, and still hasn't forgotten it.
I'm wearing one right now as we speak. I'm wearing a replica of one right now. I'm looking at it. It's on my right hand right now as we speak. I have a 1955 Brooklyn World Championship ring on my hand.
Yep.
But Clem Levine was a hell of a guy.
That Game 7 will always be my most favorite sports memory. There's nothing that could ever come close to that. But Clem had just had back surgery when he came down, and he was mildly uncomfortable, but that didn't stop him from coming to the university and talking to students and then saying some nice words. And when we got home that night, one of my colleagues and best friends in Indiana wasn't able to make the program, and the first thing we did when we got home was get on the phone, and we surprised this fella by, we called him up, and I put Clem on the phone, and he said, "Hi, Steve, guess who this is?" And Steve was mighty surprised when he found out that Clem Levine was calling him from the other end, and spoke to him and things like that. And then he came down again on another occasion, and Carl Erskine was super nice. As a matter of fact, Carl came down, I think it was just about 2 weeks after 9/11, and there were lots of people who were not thrilled about flying at that time, but he had already made the commitment, and I'm not sure that Betty, his wife, was totally thrilled about it, but he said, "I made the commitment, I'm going to come." And he came and spoke to the GW baseball team as well as to my class, and we had a real nice time. Had a nice meal at a Chinese restaurant in the neighborhood. And he signed a couple of copies of his book that he had written, so we could use it in our fundraising activities for the society. So on the playing side, those are the 2 men whom I have been lucky enough to meet. I've had some really nice conversations with George Schuba, who came to a couple of baseball card memorabilia shows in the area in the late 90s, I believe, early 2000s, something of that order. He never actually visited the project, but we did talk about the project and some of the activities. Who else have we spoken? Well, I've corresponded. Well, I've got some nice correspondence from, of course, he's passed away, but Bobby Bragan, who was an interesting story, going back to 1947 and his sort of coming of age in terms of issues related to race. And I've always found Bragan to be a really interesting story because, as you may know, he was probably the most instrumental person in turning Maury Wills' career around when he managed him in Spokane, I guess it was. And Bragan supposedly was one of the signers of that 1946 or 7 petition. that nobody's ever seen but supposedly existed. So,
Right.
but those are the men who come to mind immediately, and that's been a real kick. I mean, I've always said that was one of the most interesting parts of the project, was a chance to meet the people who played alongside it.
Who are some of the other lecturer guests that you've had over the years?
Oh my goodness, I'm going to try my best not to leave anybody out. But the one thing that we pride ourselves on is trying to bring people in from as many walks of life as possible. Some of them are well known in the District of Columbia metropolitan area and maybe not so much nationally, but others have a national audience. And again, because of budgetary factors, people stay with me or they can stay in their own homes, and we don't have to worry about hotels as well as plane fare. We're usually hoping we could get people who are, somewhat more local. But one of the real big names was Ozzy Arnold Rampersad, Robinson's biographer, who came from the West Coast from Stanford when he was out there. He gave a couple of lectures at the university about Robinson. I've had Joseph Dorrington, who's a professor of history at LIU, who put on a fabulous conference in 1997. In fact, Dorrington called his conference and the book that he put out after the conference, Jackie Robinson, Race, Sports, and the American Dream, and that's the title that I adopted for the class that I teach. So Joe's come in many times. There's a retired professor of sociology and African American studies at Richmond College in Richmond, Indiana, named Stephen Butler. Steve now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, but every year since the project began, he's been up at GW probably twice a year. In the early days, he would drive 800 miles from Indiana just to be with us, and you can't tell you what that's meant to me. So Steve has been a very important guest lecturer. We've had the name Michael Wilbon will probably ring a bell because he used to be a Washington Post columnist. He's now one of the ESPN guys with Tony Kornheiser on Pardon the Interruption.
Yeah, I know him.
Right. Pretty popular ESPN show. So he's been on. We've had some news people in the Washington area. They're anchors. Maureen Bunyan, J.C. Hayward. Last year, 2 years ago, we had Lonnie Bunch, who used to be in the Museum Studies Department at George Washington. He's the curator of the Museum of African American History and Culture that opened up a couple of years ago. So he's really a big name in museum studies and in American history. He's been by, let's see, a lot of journalists. Eugene Robinson, who's an associate editor of the Washington Post. We had a young woman. I think you were at the program when we gave her an award. I'm trying to remember.
Alice Wagner from MSNBC.
Yeah, from MSNBC. She's
and Michael Long was there.
Yeah, we go. We just run the gamut. But again, it's not. We had Bobby Mitchell, who was going back to the sports arena, who was the first African American to play for the Washington Redskins football team, the last to integrate. A really interesting man who played the game, not the football game, but the game of coming up through the system in the business arena for many years, and everybody thought he was going to be the general manager of the Redskins, and when he got to the front of the line, they picked somebody else. So it's a very sad part of the story of the football team here, which doesn't score many points with many of us in terms of their nickname, let alone their racial history. But those are the names that come to mind. We had what the guy was. What was his first name? Jason Collins, who was a Penn State All-American and then played football for 10 years with the Redskins and then later the Chicago Bears, who was pretty active in the National Football League Players Association, and spoke a little bit about some of those activities. So those are the names that come to mind. But I've got there's a woman here named Mamie Johnson. Mamie Johnson is one of the 3 African American women who actually played professionally in the Negro Leagues, and she's come into the class years ago, at least 4 or 5 occasions, and talked about she knew Hank Aaron and Willie Mays well. They all played for the Indianapolis Clowns. That was her team. And, she talked a little bit about the other guys in the league and what they thought about Robinson and what their reactions to him were when he was selected and afterwards. And so she's been in. Camille Mosley is an authority on the history of African Americans in tennis, and she's very informative. She always talks about the students who are totally non-knowledgeable about African Americans in tennis, who think that Serena and Venus Williams were the first African Americans to play tennis, and we have people who think that Tiger Woods was the first to play golf and all that. So we really try to bring some history into the class, as well as and again, it's about race and sports. It's not just about Robinson, but we use Robinson's life to look back and and look forward and those kind of things. But those are the people we've had who come to mind immediately. In the early days of the course, I used to dedicate the class to somebody in Dodger history, mostly in Robinson history. And so we went through the first 10 years of the course, where the first year was dedicated to Pee Wee Reese, because he happened to pass away a month before the course began, and then later to Rachel and to Sharon and to the writers like Jules Tigel and Arnold Rampersad and Dorrinson, who have written about Robinson, and then to players like Levine and Erskine, who were his. And we gave an award, and we had Gil Hodges Jr. come down, which was a really memorable occasion. We gave the award to Joan Hodges, because when Jack and Rachel was starting out with the Dodgers, Joan and Gil were probably, even more than Pee Wee and Donnie Reese, Joan and Gil were probably the Robinsons' closest friends on the team. And Joan made Jackie Jr., et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to give Joan an award.
By too, didn't they, Richard? I think they lived by each other.
And Joan wasn't able to come down, so she said, "Do you mind if I send Gil Jr.?" So of course we said no, and it was really, it was absolutely. I was able to come up with a video that somebody had made, a really good video. You may have seen it. It was called "What About Gil?" And the theme of it was his, why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? So I was able to show that as a way of introducing Joan Hodges and Gil Hodges, and very moving evening when he got up there to accept the award.
Fabulous. That's great.
It's kind of eerie because physically he's a lot.
He looks a little
bit heavier, but facially, striking resemblance to.
He is a striking resemblance. You're right. It is a little eerie. You're right. We've had Michael Long and Joe Dorrinson on our show, and they've honored us to be on the show, and we're so honored that you're here too. Associate Professor Richard Zamoff. Peter, do you have any other questions? We'd love to continue this talk if we can.
Well, I think your next speaker should be Ron Rabinovitz.
well, I don't know. I wanted to. Ronnie's going to have to remind me when we first hooked up, but it's been a lot of years by now.
It's been a lot of years. I'll bet it's 7, 8, or 9 years ago.
Yeah, it's almost getting close to 10. But Ron is one of several people who have given what we call our Jackie Robinson Project Teaching Award to acknowledge his many contributions to the class. And his presentation is always a big hit. Students always say at the end of the year you have a wrap up session. And my students are usually pretty honest about, what they like, what they think might be improvable, and so on. And it never fails that, there are always a whole bunch of students who say that Ron's presentation was just, it just puts things in such a different perspective. Not that Robinson needs to be humanized, but it just puts an element on who he was and the mystery of why that relationship flourished the way it did. And students are just enthralled with the presentation. And of course now we have the DVD that's come out, letters from Jackie, and students get to see that. And even in my other, I teach other sociology classes, believe it or not, and I try hard to work the sociology of sports into those classes because I've always felt that you can learn a hell of a lot about society by looking at baseball, by looking at sport, but especially about baseball. The famous Scott Barzun quote that if you want to learn something about America, you better study baseball. So I always try to bring that into my other classes. So even in my content classes that have nothing to do with sports, as far as the title of the class is concerned, there'll be a student who'll do a term project on something, and they'll see Ron's video. I'll tell them about the video, and they'll see pieces of it. I think Ron's video, and then there's another sports video by a writer by the name of Dave Zirin, who's on MSNBC occasionally. Zirin's video is called More Than a Game, or More Than Just a Game, which really puts the entire institution of sport in a sort of academic perspective, that if you want to learn something about politics, about economics, about race, about gender, sexual orientation, etc., that all of these issues get played out in sports. And of course, if you want to think about sport as a catalyst for change, you got to start with Jackie Robinson, and then you go, then you go on from there. So, but there's no question about it that Ron is one of my, and we have him come in every year. And I mean, there's no,
that's right.
One of the things nobody said, and I'll just say it now, we've already begun to plan for 2019 because that's going to be the 100th anniversary of Jack's birth. And because we're planning for 2019, I'm trying to conserve budgetarily a nice chunk of money so we can do something really, really nice in 2019. But in spite of that, even if I only have enough money to bring, 3 or 4 or 5 people in, I'm going to do my very, very best to bring Ron in at least once.
Right.
In fact, I think we have something scheduled, don't we, Ronnie?
I think we have something scheduled for November,
November, so we'll see you in November, which will be great.
Yeah, be great. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be there because I just love listening to you and meeting the students and talking to all these kids. And I applaud you so much for the tremendous job you've done at keeping Jackie's legacy alive. And you have told me, you've made a statement many, many times. I don't know the exact words, but it's that Jackie Robinson has put so many people together, over the years. That isn't that right? Is something like that you all?
Yeah, that's right. Many people have said about him that he brought people together, and the implication is that he brought people together who perhaps never would have been brought together if he hadn't been around. And I think that every time we have a presentation at the school, you just look out in the audience and you see people who are sitting together who probably never would have been there if the presentation hadn't been about Robinson. So you don't have to be, it's not being maudlin and it's not being glib. It's an actual reality that he continues to do that. And I'm not surprised, but I'm always struck by how often his name continues to come up in conversations, even with the subject matter really has nothing to do with sports, but it has something to do with changing America or something like that. I was just telling my students the other day, I don't know if you remember, you probably do, but there was a movie several years ago called Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Remember that Brokeback Mountain was about two gay cowboys.
Right.
And I read in a magazine that a film critic from the University of Southern California was reviewing Brokeback Mountain, and somehow in the course of his review pointed out that the studio, which had produced the movie, went to great lengths in their promotional material to point out that Heath Ledger, who was one of the actors in the movie, that even though he was playing a gay cowboy, was really as straight as they come, and he was dating Reese Witherspoon or somebody else at the time. So the studio felt that it was necessary, for whatever reasons, to let these potential moviegoers know that Heath Ledger was not gay, even though the part that he was acting was. So this film critic who was writing the review said, if we ever reach the day when the studios do not think it's necessary to point that out, that will be the Jackie Robinson moment. Close quote. And this guy may not have known anything about Jackie, but he knew enough to put that name in the context of that, that statement.
That's fair.
And I see advertisements on the transportation system here in Washington all the time. You'll see a picture of Jackie Robinson, and his name will not be on the poster. The only thing you'll see on the poster is a word like courage or perseverance or something. And then the advertisement is supposed to tell you that if you do this, that, or the other thing, you'll be displaying. But, they don't have to say Jackie. They don't have to say it. They just say, and my favorite illustration that we use in class is that Apple Computer, maybe a dozen years ago, put out an advertisement for one of their products, and it had Robinson his picture was on the ad, no name. His hand is grasping the hand of a white teammate. All you see in the picture is Robinson with his black hand grasping the white hand of a teammate. And the only words on the advertisement are think different. So Apple Computer wants you to use their products because it's going to encourage you to think different, and they're using Jackie Robinson think different as a way of, letting you know that this is the association they want you to. It's as profound as what he did in 46 and 47. So, that's, again, without being mortal about it, in a word, isn't that really what he did? Did he encourage Americans? Did he challenge Americans? Did he force Americans? Did he educate Americans to think different about issues related to race? I mean, if you want to sum it up in a sentence, I think that's about what he did. So
I remember those. I remember those ads from Apple, and I enjoyed all of them. They had a still picture of Bob Dylan, a black and white still picture of Bob Dylan. The thing that galls me, because my wife and I used to look at them, and she used to look over at me and wink, because the big thing was think different, and I knew it should have been think differently, because it was an adverb describing how to think. Think is the verb, differently is the adverb, but it was think different. But I said to her, that's poetic license. They can do that, and they make their point very well. They made their point very well. I remember those ads, yes.
Yeah,
strong,
great.
Very strong.
This is terrific.
Well, Professor, I'll tell you what. Hell of a show.
It's been great.
Not a hell of a show. I don't think we covered every single thing, but we covered most of it. And whenever you have a free time on a Tuesday night, you're very welcome to come back and share the latest developments regarding what you do and how you do it. Extremely well explained. I had questions galore going into the show. I come out the other end with all of them answered, and it makes me feel very good that Ron Rabinovitz is not the only person in America that is keeping Jackie's name alive.
Well, you know, I just got to tell you one little quick story if we have time. My brother, who's really actively involved in the society as well, often goes. He lives in Florida. They just escaped the Hurricane Irma and came up to Washington, and he just went back this morning. He often wears his Jackie Robinson shirt around, and he tells me that it never fails that when he goes out of the house with that shirt on, he meets 2 or 3 people somewhere, not just in Florida, but here in Washington and elsewhere, and they will always say something about the Dodgers. I mean, it's not just people in our little society. I mean, they're all over the place.
True.
And I meet people all the time.
Everywhere I go with my Dodger shirts on, I always get compliments, and I get conversations. Some of them short, some of them longer. From guy, oh, you're from Brooklyn. Oh, I was from blah blah blah, and they'll start talking about the old games, Channel 9 and Vince Scully, and oh God, it's fantastic. A lot of people still have this in their heart. I even get women, believe it or not, I get women that come up to me and say, "Is that shirt about the Brooklyn Dodgers?" And I go, "Yeah, why?" And they go, "When I was a little girl, my father used to bring me to Ebbets Field, and he taught me how to keep score, and my favorite player was Carl Ferrillo, and blah, blah." And pretty soon, after about 15 minutes, we'll be talking and talking and talking, and I never get any shopping done. I have to go back and get fresh milk because I think the milk turns sour while I was talking to the woman. But, I mean, it happens all the time. It's magical. It's not only Jackie. It's the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Last summer, my brother was having lunch in a restaurant in Venice, Florida, and 4 women were at an adjoining table having a conversation, and Barry could not help but overhearing the conversation, and one of the women was, they had just seen the movie 42, and one of the women was saying to one of the others that a friend of hers used to date somebody who played baseball with Jackie Robinson, and she couldn't remember his last name, but his first name was Eugene. So Barry couldn't resist stepping over and saying, perhaps it was Gene Hermansky, and the woman just fell on the floor because she couldn't believe that there was anybody else in the universe who knew that Eugene was Gene Hermansky. So, those things happen all the time. And by the way, I'm going to be watching the magic number to bring us up to 2017. I'm going to be watching the magic number. I teach on Mondays and Wednesdays all day. But if the magic number's down to 1, I know Arizona's not playing on Thursday, so if the magic number's down to 1, I'm going to shoot up to Philly on Thursday afternoon and watch them clinch if it comes down to that. So
I already have my seat. I'm in section 226. I'm in section 226, right behind home plate. I have
I may not be at 226, and hopefully they'll clinch it before Thursday. But if they don't, maybe I'll make up a sign and I'll put it 226.
Well, I tell you what. If you can find your way to section 226, I'm in row 4, seats 9 and 10. Me and my wife. I'll have either my Bellinger jersey on or my Kershaw jersey on, and I'll buy you a beer.
Okay, section 226, row 4, seat 9 and 10. I just wrote it down.
That's it. 226, okay. Right behind home plate.
Okay.
So great.
Right behind home plate, one section up, like a mezzanine thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like one level up.
Before, so I think I could find it. It was great talking to you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in a while.
Thank you,
Great
Richard.
talking to you.
Thanks so much. Give my love to your beautiful bride and to Barry and his wife.
Okay.
It was wonderful.
Talk to you guys later.
So,
okay, thank you very much. Good night.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye now.